Welcome to the build-up tutorial for the Studio Scale Escape Pod. Linked in the description is the behind-the-scenes build blog, and also a link to a video that demonstrates these kit parts in greater detail. If you enjoy this content, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to see more. This tutorial will cover the following steps to creating this museum-quality escape pod: trimming, assembly, creating a 3-point mounting system, base coating, weathering, fine detail, decal application, and final assembly. Your engine assembly is 3 main parts. These are all very easy to trim. The flashing is minimal, there's no seam lines. So I've just got some 60 grit paper here. And you just want to run these parts flat end down, just get rid of that flashing. Here's what the engines look like fully assembled, all 3 parts. Trimming these body pieces is the same way. You just remove the flashing by rubbing it down on some paper, and you're done. Okay, let's start working on the main hull. There is a slight seam line that runs down the body here, and that is easily addressed with a little bit of sanding. I don't think you'll need Bondo. Just go ahead and give this a flush sand and inspect the rest of the body for any kind of areas that might need attention. Your kit contains 3 lengths of these tank treads. What you want to do is just trim some of that flashing off on the side and get it to fit these trenches. Once you have a good fit, they have to come down just a little bit. You'll get a nice fit in there. What I did is I took a piece of paper and cut a couple strips, measured the length inside that track, got my measurement, because these are just slightly, just a little bit different on each side. Then I took my strip, compared it against my casting, I trimmed the casting. These are very thin castings, so they're very easy to bend, and that's what we're going to do with each of these tracks with heat. I'm using a regular off-the-shelf heat gun. This is a paint stripping gun, and I'm not going to do it on camera because I don't want to be distracted, and this is kind of like it's a hot end. You don't want to burn yourself, so concentrate. Heat it up. Go back and forth evenly. This will start to feel a little bit wobbly and bendy. Then you'll take it, bring this back into view, and you'll take it and bend it to the trench. And you'll end up with curved pieces like this that fit perfectly into the trench. And then just glue those down. I'm going to base coat the bottom pan and the lid heirloom white. Normally I do gray primer, but we want to keep everything bright as the undercoat, so it's satin heirloom white. Any kind of an off-white color is what you want to use. Now, before I start laying down my details, I need to mod this base a little bit so that the engine tabs, the little mount pegs, will fit in here. So I'm going to deepen these holes, not all the way through, just a little bit deeper. Larger bit for the outside holes, a little bit of a smaller bit for the inside holes. And now we can test fit our engines, and they should all fit very snugly into place. I'm very happy with that fit. Nothing is glued yet, and the engines are snug enough to stay in place upside down. Alright, let's start detailing this bottom pan. Okay, here we go with greeblies. Let's start with one of the tiniest pieces we have. This is a little detail part that goes on top of this C-Lab piece, right in the middle, times 4. You'll find 6 of these tiny little knobs. There's little ribbed knobs that I can't seem to focus on. And these all seat on the sides of these angled thruster mounts. So they sit on both sides, one there, one on this side. Let me talk about mounting for a minute. You don't have to mount this model. It actually stands very stable on its engines, straight up and down. However, I'm going to show you 3 different mounting options, and I'm going to install all 3 of them. And for our base, we are using a PANAVISE mount. These are available on Amazon.com. I believe these are $29. I've got 1/4-inch couplers. I'm going to be embedding 3 of these into the model. At the cap, we're going to embed a coupler straight up and down, right in the middle. On the base, we are going to be embedding one all the way down flush, right in the middle. And on the body, we are putting it here on this side at the rear. So we're just going to bore a hole there in that center and drill it deep enough for that coupler to mount flush. Straight through here. Here is your bottom pan with the coupler epoxied into place. This is a cap that covers that. I can mount this using earth magnets, so it's easily removable. And same thing with the lid. I'm going to use earth magnets to hold this cover plate securely into position. If you want to mount it from the top, just pop this guy off and use your mount. We're going to start detailing this bottom pan with these little triangular pieces. Those go into these 4 spots here. And then these C-Lab parts all go into position like this. And you want to leave enough room here on these edges for these 8 rad parts to live right there. I glued on the triangular detail parts and the little chip pieces off camera. I want to show you what I did here. So this now is one assembly that's removable, so we can use that center mount on the bottom. And you can see that I've got the triangular piece and the chip piece on all 4 corners. And I did that while this was in position with the engines in place, so I could see what I was doing. Just a little bit of super glue, a little bit of spray accelerant, and that was done in just a few minutes. Here is what the rear mount looks like. Here's the top mount. Here is the body mount on the side. Let me show you how these magnetic closures work. I'm using these little tiny earth magnets, and this is actually a lot easier than you think. I have 2 of them stacked here, and this just magnetizes straight to that coupler. So, boom, done. Really tight, super tight fit. And the cap, same thing, little earth magnet glued on there. It magnetizes straight to the coupler itself. Boom, done. The last thing left to do for now on this bottom pan is prep these 3 thrusters. We're not going to attach them just yet. We still have a lot of work to do, and I don't want to have these permanently attached, but we will prep the mounts by pre-drilling these holes. And that will give these pegs a nice seat, like that. Here we are on day 2, and we're going to start detailing the hull. Leave this one goes in the front, and this goes in the rear above the trench. The attitude thrusters are 2 parts. It's pinned already. Slide it into that hole, glue it down, and then this glues onto the 2 tabs. This little piston is going to live right inside there. And on these vacuform slips, you'll be gluing 3 of these miniature little parts here, here, and here. Just want to smooth this up a little bit before we go on to airbrushing. Let's talk about color for the escape pod. My base color is going to be a mix of Deck Tan Tamiya and XF Flat White Tamiya, medium blue, I have a medium gray, flat black, and an oil base rust. Here is my Deck Tan and White mix. I pre-painted this piece. You can tell by my fingers. But you can see that that heirloom white is a nice base coat, but what we're doing is we're killing that warmth and bringing in this really nice ILM sort of gray, off-white tone, concrete color. It's a really interesting mix. But you can see the color difference here. A lot of guys will want to start with gray, or they'll pre-shade with black, and they'll do all this fancy stuff. I really don't like doing that. I feel like it muddies down the base color. I want a nice, clean, bright base. So I'm not doing any pre-shading. I'm not going with a gray base primer, keeping it very light, and that heirloom white is the perfect shade. It doesn't take a whole lot of paint to kill that warmth, just like this. Everything is base coated. I've got the lid CA'd down to the hull. I'm going to use a little bit of Bondo to touch up any areas that are gaps. Let this dry, sand it, and we'll move forward. There are 5 areas to mask off on this project. I'm starting with these panels here. So I've got it masked off on the panel lines here. It's very loosely masked around that pit because it's going to all be covered up with this little laser cut slip. So I'm not really worried about making a clean line here. I just don't want to get the gray-blue color onto that ring. So it's just very loosely masked. I'm just making sure I've got enough coverage. Now the color I'm using is a combination of medium blue, medium gray, and white. It's a very subtle bluish gray color. Okay, here is our light gray blue color, and here's the slip that just goes on here and finishes that detail. Here it is, y'all. This is base coated. There's still a little more detail to put on this, and then it's ready for weathering. The nice thing is I'll be able to mount this from the bottom, so I can do all my streaks going down, and I'll be able to mount it from the top to do the rest of the detailing and the wiring down below. So I'm drilling holes here and here for a little piece of it's just LED wiring I'm using that connects right here. So just a little length of wire here to there, times 4. It's time to start weathering this model. Let me show you the color palette. I have, these are all, by the way, these are oil paints, all of them. I have a light gray, I have a medium gray, dark gray, it's more like a charcoal color. I have a yellow ochre, I have a medium brown. I've got a rust color that's pretty opaque. I've got another rust color that's very translucent. I have a medium brown color. I have an opaque black, and I have a very translucent black. When I say translucent, I'm using more of the solvent with the paint just to make it a very thin paint. The equipment I'm using today is a off-the-shelf compressor. I have a double action Eclipse airbrush, a Pache. I'm probably going to break the Pache out too. I love that airbrush. And then I've just got some standard kind of cheap brushes I bought at the hobby store today. Got my parts laid out. I've got my model mounted, and I am ready to weather. Yours might not be like this, but I've got a bottom mount, so I can just take this guy off, which is what I'm going to do because I want to be able to get inside of all the nooks and crannies. I've got my light gray. It's very translucent. And I'm just going to come in and I'm going to start discoloring all of this detail. Not all of it. I'm just going to come in here and push the paint around. Remember, it's really easy to overdo weathering. You want to start really light, subtle at first, and then step back, take a look at things, and then you can go heavier, but go really light at first. I also want to make sure that I'm digging the bristles in underneath these pieces so that nothing gets left behind. So I'm really scrubbing it into all these nooks and crannies. All these undercuts will need color. I'm going to go ahead and continue down the body with this very light, translucent gray. Just give a little bit of vertical streak to start, and just shade these parts just a little bit. This paint will stay wet for a long time, so you can go ahead and push it around. If it's too heavy, you can move it. You can wait till it starts to gel up a little bit and move it again. But I'm just coming in here and I'm just introducing just the very slight kisses of discoloration. Now I'm heading in with a little bit of medium gray. I'm just going to come in here and wash some of this uniform color away. I feel like this paint might be a little thick, so I'm going to come in and mix in a little bit of my solvent. But I want to come in here and really start to push this paint around. Start to define these edges a little bit better. Alright, I have switched this to its bottom mount, so now I can let gravity help me with those vertical streaks. Now I'm not filtering, I'm not actually putting the paint on and then wiping it down. You want to avoid that for this particular model. I just want to discolor this. I don't want to go too heavy. I'm keeping it really light. But you want to start defining some of these shapes now. Before I go any further with the weathering, what I want to do is start chipping away at this yellow strip. And the paint's real thin, so I can come in here and just start chipping that paint off to reveal some of this battle damage. And I'll be doing that for both of these yellow strips. We are going to start airbrushing phases now. I've got some really terrific reference shots pulled up right now so I can kind of look at those while I go. Now I'm switching over to acrylic, and it's super thin. Very, very thin, translucent black. It's kind of like a smoke, and I want to go really light at first. So I'm going to turn this guy and look at this reference and see that there's a little dark area here. You can see that very little paint is coming out. What I like to do is grab a sheet of paper and just kind of see what's happening here. Get a little control. So I've got some streak happening here. I've got some dark area going on over here. I'm going to leave that alone. Very light line here. Again, I don't want to overdo this. I just want to keep it light and simple. It's a little bit of dark shading from here to across here. On the back, we have some vertical streaks. Let's go real light at first. Just a couple passes, that's done. Don't overdo it now. You would expect that the inside of these cones would be super dark, but they're not really. So just really go light. Just a little bit of that shading. You're done. Now we're getting to the stage where you could make or break this model, and that's the rust. It's very easy to overdo the rust on this particular model. So I'm going to seal this guy matte clear. Give us a little bit of insurance if we don't like the rust, if it's coming on too heavy, if we get any drips we don't like. We can always rub it right off and start again. Instead of using a straight oil color rust or an acrylic rust, I made my own. I found the other ones were a little too dark. So I mixed red, yellow, and a little bit of Model Masters rust, and I came up with this color, which I am much more happy with. So we've got brighter rust tone. A lot more yellow than you're going to find off the shelf. So there's a custom mix. Here we go with rust. I have a very thinned down version of this rust. This is called ludicrously thin rust. It's something like 10 parts solvent to 1 part paint. It's very thin. Then I've got a thicker rust. That'll come in handy later. I'm using this thin rust, and it's super, super crazy thin. And I'm going to go ahead and start pushing this around. I'd like to show you how subtle this rust color is. I'm going to put a little bit of a rust streak from here down to here. I'm barely pulling back on the trigger. And I'm done. There's a little streak right there. I don't want to go heavier than that. Got another guy that comes down here. I'm done. Smaller one here. Done with that. Go very light. There's a tiny bit of rust streak action happening here and here, but it's separated by those panel lines, so I'm going to cover this and make a distinct separation here. There are some pretty heavy-duty rust stains on these areas, so I've got a mix that's a little bit thicker than what I had my airbrush just now. I'm going to go ahead and color these guys in. There's a little spot right here. And this whole area looks like it's covered up. The secret is to have very thin paint. If it's not dark enough, you can just let this dry for a minute and come back and do it again. There are some nicks and scratches on this model, and all I'm doing is I'm just using a flathead screwdriver just to scrape away some of that paint. So I'm revealing a lot of this damage. And I'll do a little fresh spot here for you. There's a couple little nicks that are right here. On these gray-blue areas, there's a whole lot of black marks. I'm just using a liner brush and some black paint. Streaks. There's all kinds of little black hash marks on this model. I'm going to be applying those with a black Sharpie. So we've got two rectangles that are here. There's that one. And there's that. So there's little marks here, here, they're all over the place. So just look at your reference photos and figure out where those go. The kit includes this laser cut mylar sheet, and that will fit over this window with a little spray 77. I'm coming back over with a little bit of staining. I'm doing some medium gray staining and some black, very watered down staining here. It's a little bit of a halo around this edge. Coming in, giving a tiny bit of filter for these details. Coming on to the attitude thrusters, just a little bit of loose paint. This is so loose that it's dripping, but that's fine. I don't mind a few drips, but if it's dripping to where I don't want it, I can just scoop it back up. The placement of each one of these tiny pieces goes on the 3 thrusters right here on the side. Alright, we're at the finish line. Now it's time to take care of these yellow cables. The kit comes with a length of wire. And what I've done is I've doubled them up, glued them with a little bit of thin super glue, doubled them up again, glued them. So now I've got strands of 4 lengths of wire. I'm going to paint these guys yellow and then attach them at the engines. And then these guys, I'll show you how tiny these I think are the smallest pieces of the kit. These are what the cables insert into at the engine bells, at the base of the engine bells. The kit includes these water slide decals. We have this license plate decal that lays down right here. We have this funky kind of blue insignia decal, and that's going to live right over underneath this. and this little hash mark decal that lives up at the top near the attitude thruster. When you trim these out, make sure that you trim all of the white away. This is a white water slide decal, so if you can see, I've got a little indication of where to trim. Just make sure that you trim off that black line. You trim off the white around these edges, and then you trim on this black line. I won't go into extreme detail about how to apply these water slide decals. I've got a great tutorial that I'll link in the description, but just set it down in place, and you want to use either a micro set or micro saw to seal these guys in place. Once you have all your cables in place and touched up with this yellow ochre, make sure that you go in behind that with really dirty gray and muddy brown. Dirty up these cables. That's it for this escape pod tutorial. I hope you enjoyed this build, and I hope I was able to encourage you. To learn more, be sure to read the video's description to find links for more content. We have created many hundreds of tutorial videos. As a sample, click these links to see the jetpack and Y-wing helmet tutorials. Thanks for watching.